2 hours ago, maritime tracking systems registered unusual activity in the Strait of Hormuz. Commercial shipping slowed. Insurance premiums for tankers transiting the strait increased 300% overnight. Naval vessels from 3 nations repositioned to defensive postures. Oil futures jumped 8% in early trading. All of this happened because of tension in a waterway that most people have never heard of, but that controls more of the global economy than any other geographic chokepoint on Earth. The Strait of Hormuz is a 21-mile-wide channel separating Iran from the Arabian Peninsula. It connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea beyond. It doesn't look strategically important on maps. It's narrow, shallow in places, and surrounded by desert. But every day, approximately 21 million barrels of oil pass through this strait. That represents roughly 21% of global petroleum consumption. 1/5 of all the oil that powers the world economy flows through this single narrow passage that Iran can threaten to close whenever tensions escalate. Here's why the world watches this strait with anxiety that transcends regional politics. Modern civilization runs on energy. Transportation systems, manufacturing, agriculture, heating, electricity generation all depend on petroleum products. The global economy doesn't have spare capacity to absorb sudden loss of 21 million barrels per day. Alternative routes exist for some Middle Eastern oil, but they're limited in capacity and would take years to scale up. If the Strait of Hormuz closes even temporarily, energy prices spike to levels that trigger global recession. The numbers tell the story. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, and Iraq export the majority of their oil through this strait. These nations produce roughly 20 million barrels daily, with most of it transiting Hormuz to reach Asian, European, and American markets. Japan imports nearly 90% of its oil, with significant portions coming through the strait. China, the world's largest energy importer, receives roughly 40% of its oil from Middle Eastern suppliers using this route. South Korea, India, and major European economies all depend on energy supplies that must pass through these 21 miles of water that Iran can threaten at will. Iran's geographic position gives it leverage that military and economic power alone couldn't provide. The strait runs along Iran's southern coast. Iranian territory includes islands positioned strategically within the waterway. Iran maintains extensive coastal defenses, anti-ship missiles, fast attack craft, mines, and shore-based artillery, specifically designed to threaten shipping in confined waters where large tankers cannot maneuver effectively. If Iran decides to close or significantly disrupt traffic through the strait, it possesses multiple means to do so. The threat isn't hypothetical. Iran has explicitly stated on multiple occasions that if it cannot export its own oil due to sanctions or military action, it will ensure that other regional producers cannot export theirs either. During the 1980s Iran-Iraq War, both nations attacked tankers in what became known as the Tanker War. In 2019, following escalating tensions, several tankers were attacked with mines in the strait's vicinity. In 2021, a tanker was struck by a drone in an attack attributed to Iran. These incidents demonstrate both capability and willingness to use the strait as economic weapon. But closing the strait isn't simple action with predictable results. It's escalatory move with consequences Iran must carefully calculate. Disrupting global energy supplies would trigger international response, potentially including military action to reopen the waterway. European and Asian nations dependent on energy flowing through the strait would face immediate economic crisis, creating political pressure for intervention. The U.S. Navy maintains permanent presence in the region specifically to ensure freedom of navigation through this choke point. Iran's strategy doesn't require complete closure. Ambiguity serves Iranian interests better than total blockade. Mining the strait, conducting occasional attacks on tankers, threatening shipping with harassment from fast attack craft. These actions increase risk perception enough to spike insurance rates, slow traffic, and raise energy prices without crossing thresholds that guarantee massive military response. The economic impact of uncertainty can be nearly as significant as actual closure while avoiding the costs of direct confrontation with superior naval forces. Here's where the strategic calculation becomes genuinely complex. Western military forces, primarily American naval assets, have overwhelming capability to destroy Iranian coastal defenses and clear the Strait of Mines. But doing so requires time measured in weeks, not hours. During that time, energy markets are in crisis, shipping is halted, and global economic disruption accumulates. Even successful military operation to reopen the strait doesn't prevent economic damage from the closure period or deter future Iranian actions once foreign naval forces eventually withdraw. Insurance markets price these risks in real time. War risk insurance for tankers transiting the strait increases whenever tensions rise. Those increased premiums get passed through to oil prices, affecting energy costs globally. The 300% overnight increase in premiums detected 2 hours ago reflects market assessment that current tensions have elevated the probability of Iranian action to levels that justify dramatically higher risk pricing. Markets are preparing for potential disruption even before any physical attack occurs. Alternative routes exist, but cannot replace Hormuz capacity. Saudi Arabia has built pipelines across the Arabian Peninsula to Red Sea ports, allowing some oil exports to bypass the strait. UAE has similar pipeline infrastructure, but these alternatives can handle roughly 7 million barrels daily combined, less than 1/3 of current Hormuz traffic. Scaling up alternative routes would require infrastructure investments taking years to complete and costing hundreds of billions of dollars. The alternatives are useful for reducing vulnerability, but cannot eliminate dependence on the strait. The economic impact of even temporary closure would be staggering. Energy analysts estimate that if the strait closed completely for 30 days, oil prices would exceed $200 per barrel. Gasoline prices in the United States would surpass $8 per gallon. European economies already struggling with energy costs would face crisis conditions. Asian manufacturing dependent on reliable energy supplies would experience widespread shutdowns. The global economy would contract by an estimated 2 to 3% in a single quarter, recession-level impact from 1 month of closure. Strategic competition adds layers of complexity. China has become increasingly dependent on Middle Eastern energy transiting the strait while simultaneously building relationships with Iran as counterweight to American influence. Beijing faces difficult calculations about whether to support Iranian actions that threaten energy supplies China needs or align with international efforts to keep the strait open, even if that means opposing strategic partner. Similar tensions affect other major importers who want energy security but resist supporting military actions in distant regions. Regional dynamics matter significantly. Gulf Arab states whose economies depend entirely on oil exports through the strait have invested heavily in defenses against Iranian threats but lack military capability to guarantee freedom of navigation without American support. They depend on the strait remaining open but cannot ensure it without external assistance. That dependence shapes their foreign policy calculations and limits their ability to oppose Iranian actions in other domains. 3 scenarios dominate strategic planning around the strait. First, current tensions remain managed through diplomatic channels and mutual deterrence. Iran threatens but doesn't act. Naval forces maintain presence. Shipping continues with elevated insurance costs but no actual disruption. Markets gradually adjust to higher risk premiums as new normal. Second, limited Iranian action tests international response. Mining incident, drone attack on tanker, harassment of shipping by fast attack craft. Enough to demonstrate capability and raise costs without triggering overwhelming military response. International coalition conducts minesweeping operations, enhances naval presence, and eventually restores normal traffic. Both sides claim victory while avoiding wider conflict. Third, comprehensive Iranian campaign to close or severely restrict strait traffic. Multiple attacks on tankers, extensive mining, coastal defense systems targeting naval vessels attempting to maintain freedom of navigation. Military operation to reopen the strait requires weeks of sustained combat. Energy prices spike to crisis levels. Global economy faces severe disruption. Regional war becomes reality, rather than theoretical possibility. 2 hours ago, shipping slowed and insurance rates spiked because markets understand what strategic planners have known for decades. The Strait of Hormuz is the single most important choke point in global energy infrastructure. 21% of the world's oil flows through 21 miles of water that one nation can threaten whenever it calculates that economic disruption serves strategic objectives better than restraint. The world watches this strait because modern civilization's dependence on energy makes it impossible to ignore. When tensions rise in the Middle East, the first question isn't about military capabilities or diplomatic postures. It's about what happens to the strait, because if those 21 miles close, the consequences reach every economy, every industry, every consumer dependent on energy that currently flows freely through waters that could become battlefield overnight. The strait remains open today. Shipping continues. Oil flows to markets, but the 300% insurance premium increase reflects the reality that markets understand and populations often don't. The world economy depends on the continued operation of infrastructure that exists at the sufferance of nations whose interests may not align with keeping it open. And there's no backup plan that works if the strait closes for any extended period. That's why the world watches. Not because of abstract geopolitical interest, because economic survival depends on 21 miles of water remaining open for the ships that carry the energy making modern life possible.